I smiled on cue for 33 years, but the silence at my birthday dinner was deafening when my sister handed me a DNA test as a joke. It was not the mockery that froze my blood. It was the terror in my mother's eyes. She knew. 3 months later, an estate lawyer looked at me and said, "This does not start with the money, it starts with you." That test was never a prank. It was the trigger for a trap my father had secretly prepared. My name is Maren Whitaker. I am 33 years old, and if you looked at my life on paper, you would see a woman who has successfully edited herself down to the bare essentials. I live in a 700-square-foot apartment in Minneapolis that friends jokingly describe as sterile and colleagues politely call organized. The walls are a stark, unyielding white. The furniture is functional, gray, and sparse. I own 4 plates, 4 bowls, and exactly enough silverware to host a dinner party that I will never throw. To the outside observer, my lifestyle looks like a disciplined commitment to modern minimalism, perhaps inspired by some Scandinavian design blog or a desire to reduce my carbon footprint. But it is not a trend, it is a safety mechanism. When you grow up in a house where every object is a potential landmine and every conversation is a coded message, you learn to crave empty space. I keep my life empty so that I can see exactly what is in it. I need to know that there are no shadows in the corners, no hidden agendas tucked under the rug, and no secrets buried in the back of the closet. I work as a senior risk analyst at Northbridge Risk Labs. It is a job that suits me perfectly because it requires a specific kind of pessimism that passes for professional prudence. My entire career is built on the premise of looking at a perfectly functioning system and identifying exactly where and when it is going to break. I calculate the probability of disaster. I assign numerical values to human error. I tell companies that the thing they are most confident about is actually the thing that will destroy them. I am very good at my job because I was raised in a high-risk environment disguised as a perfect American family. The Whitakers are Beacon Hill, Boston. We are not just wealthy, we are historic. We are the kind of money that does not shout because it does not have to. We live in a 4-story brick townhouse on a street where the cobblestones are older than the country itself. The windows are made of glass so old it ripples slightly at the edges, distorting the view of the world outside. That has always felt like an appropriate metaphor for my childhood. Inside that house, reality was whatever my mother, Vivian, decided it was. Vivian Whitaker does not believe in God. She believes in reputation. To her, the family name is not just an identifier, it is a religion. She curated our lives with the ruthless efficiency of a museum director. Every holiday card, every charity gala appearance, and every public interaction was a performance art piece titled The Perfect Family. In her world, emotions were messy, biological inconveniences that needed to be suppressed or, at the very least, scheduled for a time when no one was watching. She loved the portrait of her family hanging in the foyer more than she loved the actual people standing in it. Then there was Sloane. My sister is 3 years older than me, and she sucked the oxygen out of every room she entered before I even had a chance to take a breath. Sloane is brilliant, sharp, and terrifyingly charismatic. She inherited my mother's obsession with control but lacked her subtlety. If my mother was the director of the play, Sloane was the lead actress who refused to let anyone else have a line. She treated people like props. If you were useful, she picked you up and shined you. If you were in her way, she knocked you over. And if you were me, you were simply part of the background scenery, necessary for the composition but ultimately forgettable. For most of my life, I accepted this hierarchy. I was the quiet one, the mistake, the one who didn't quite fit the aesthetic. But there was always my father. Grant Whitaker was a man of few words, but he possessed a quiet, steady warmth that was the only thing keeping me from freezing to death in that house. He was the one who taught me how to read a balance sheet and how to tie a sailor's knot, even though we never owned a boat. He was the only one who ever looked at me and actually saw me, rather than looking through me to see if the wallpaper behind my head needed replacing. When he died 2 months ago, The anchor chain snapped. I returned to Boston for the funeral, intending to stay for 3 days. The service was exactly what Vivian wanted. Tasteful, expensive, and emotionally hollow. There were 300 guests, and I doubt more than 10 of them knew my father's favorite song. I stood by the grave in a black coat that cost more than my first car, listening to people offer condolences that sounded like business transactions. It was during the reception at the house that I felt the shift. The air in the library was thick with the smell of lilies and scotch. I had stepped into the hallway to escape the suffocating sympathy of a woman who kept calling me by my sister's name. And that was when I heard Sloane. She was standing in the alcove near the kitchen, her back to me, pressing her phone hard against her ear. Her posture was not that of a grieving daughter. It was the posture of a predator sensing movement in the brush. "I need the file ready by the 15th, Sloane was saying. Her voice was low, clipped, and precise. "No, do not wait for the probate hearing. The timing has to be exact. If we miss the window, the leverage is gone." I froze. My father had been in the ground for less than 4 hours. "She is here now," Sloane continued, her voice dropping an octave. "She looks clueless. Just get the paperwork in order. I will handle the optics." I stepped back into the shadows of the staircase before she could turn around. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not out of grief, but out of a sudden, sharp instinct for self-preservation. The file, the timing, the leverage, these were not words you used when discussing catering or floral arrangements. These were words of war. I left Boston the next morning, 12 hours earlier than planned. I told my mother I had a crisis at work, a lie she accepted easily because it fit her narrative that my career was a nuisance. I flew back to Minneapolis, back to my white walls and my silence, telling myself I was being paranoid. Grief does strange things to the mind, I reasoned. Maybe Sloane was talking about her own business. Maybe I was just looking for a reason to villainize the sister who had made me feel small for 33 years. But the unease did not leave. It settled in my gut like a stone. I went back to work at Northbridge, diving into spreadsheets and risk assessments, trying to drown out the memory of Sloane's voice. I checked my bank accounts. I checked my credit report. I secured my digital life with the same paranoia I applied to my corporate clients. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, even though I had no idea what size the shoe was or who was wearing it. 3 weeks passed. The silence from Boston was heavy, broken only by a generic email from the family estate attorney stating that the reading of the will would be delayed due to administrative complexities. That phrase alone should have triggered every alarm bell in my head. In the world of high-net-worth estates, administrative complexities is usually legal shorthand for someone is fighting over something. Then, yesterday evening, my phone rang. The screen displayed Mother. I stared at it for 5 full rings before picking up. "Marin," Vivian said. No greeting, no question of how I was doing, just my name, spoken with the expectation of immediate attention. "Hello, Mother," I said, putting the phone on speaker and setting it on my kitchen counter. I began wiping down a surface that was already clean. "We are having a dinner for your birthday next week," she said. It was not a question. "Saturday, 7 in the evening. Don't be late." "I can't come to Boston, Mother," I said, my hand tightening on the sponge. "I have work, and honestly, I didn't plan on celebrating this year." "Nonsense," she snapped, the facade of politeness slipping just a fraction. "Grant would have wanted us together. It has been a terrible month. Marin, the family needs to heal. We need to be seen together. We need to be a united front." Seen together. There it was, the image, the portrait. "Sloane has been asking for you," Vivian added, her tone softening into something that sounded dangerously like affection. "She has planned something special, a little reunion. She says she wants to make peace." The memory of the phone call in the hallway flashed through my mind. I will handle the optics. I really don't think I can get the time off. I tried again, though I knew my resistance was thinning. The guilt my mother wielded was a precision instrument, honed over decades. "It is one dinner, Marin," she said, her voice turning cold and brittle as glass. Your father left us a legacy to protect. The least you can do is show up and eat a slice of cake. Unless, of course, you simply don't care about what happens to this house or to everything he built? The threat was vague, hanging in the air like smoke. What happens to this house? I looked around my empty, safe apartment. I looked at the white walls that told no stories. I realized then that I could not hide in Minneapolis forever. If Sloan was planning something, if there was a file and a timeline, I needed to know what it was. Ignoring a risk does not make it go away. It just makes you unprepared when the impact hits. Fine, I said, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. I will be there. Saturday at 7. Good, Vivian said. Wear something appropriate. Not that gray thing you wore to the service. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I had agreed to go back, but I knew this wasn't a birthday party. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the cold sensation of being watched. I was walking onto a stage, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't just an extra. I had a terrible feeling that this time, I was the target. The notification appeared on my phone screen 3 hours before my flight to Boston. It was an automated alert from a courier service linked to an old family email account I had forgotten to sign out of years ago. The subject line was mundane, a standard delivery confirmation for a package dropped off at the Whitaker residence on Beacon Hill. The recipient was Sloan. The contents were listed simply as Kit, a generic descriptor that could have meant anything from cosmetics to cleaning supplies. Yet, staring at that word, I felt a prick of cold sweat at the base of my neck. My sister did not order generic kits. Sloan ordered specific, branded, high-value items. A vague description usually meant she did not want the contents advertised. I swiped the notification away, but the unease traveled with me all the way to Massachusetts. By the time I walked through the front door of my childhood home, the atmosphere was already pulled tight as a piano wire. The house smelled of lemon polish and expensive, unscented wax. The smell of a place that is cleaned but not lived in. My mother, Vivian, greeted me in the foyer. She was wearing a structured navy dress that looked like armor, her hair coiffed into a helmet of pale gold. She hugged me, but her body was rigid, and she pulled away a fraction of a second too soon. We moved to the dining room. The table was set for 3, but it was long enough to seat 12. We were spaced out like opposing generals negotiating a treaty, with the vast expanse of polished mahogany between us acting as a demilitarized zone. The centerpiece was a low, sprawling arrangement of white hydrangeas, dense enough to obscure my view of Sloane's hands, but not her face. Sloane sat at the head of the table, a seat my father used to occupy. She did not ask if I minded. She simply took it, pouring herself sparkling water with the steady, deliberate movements of a surgeon. She looked impeccable. Of course, her silk blouse was the color of ice, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I am glad you made it, Marin," Sloane said, her voice smooth. "I was worried work would keep you away. You always seem to be drowning in data." "I made time," I said, unfolding my napkin. "Mother said it was important." "It is," Sloane said, picking up her fork. "We have so much to discuss. The future of the estate requires coordination." For the next 40 minutes, the dinner felt less like a celebration and more like a deposition. Sloane dominated the conversation, steering it aggressively toward her recent accomplishments. She spoke at length about her new connections in the city, dropping names of partners at prestigious law firms and influential judges. She was not just bragging, she was building a wall of authority, brick by brick. She wanted me to know she was connected, protected, and informed. "I had lunch with Judge Holloway yesterday," Sloane said, slicing through her steak. "He mentioned how complicated probate can get when families are unprepared. It is a good thing I have been organizing Father's personal files. It is a mess, really. You would be shocked at what slips through the cracks." She looked at me then, her eyes locking onto mine with a predatory intensity. She was waiting for me to flinch. She wanted me to ask what she had found. I turned to my mother. Vivian had barely touched her food. She was holding her wineglass by the stem, swirling the dark red liquid in a tight, hypnotic circle. She brought the glass to her lips, held it there for a moment, and then set it down without taking a sip. It was a nervous tic I had not seen in years. She looked pale, her gaze fixing on the tablecloth, then darting to the grandfather clock, then to Sloane, and finally settling on her own hands. She looked like a woman who was waiting for an explosion she was powerless to stop. "Speaking of probate," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "has the lawyer set a date for the will reading? I have not received any official correspondence since the initial notice." The sound of cutlery against china stopped instantly. Vivian froze. Her hand jerked on the stem of her wineglass, threatening to tip it over. Her eyes snapped to Sloane, wide and pleading, as if asking for permission to speak, or perhaps begging for silence. It was a look of total submission. Sloane did not blink. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin, taking her time. "Everything happens in due time, Marin," Sloane said, her tone shifting from conversational to dismissive. "There are protocols. Don't be impatient. It is unbecoming to look so eager for a payout." "It is not about a payout," I said, tightening my grip on my fork. "It is about closure. Father was meticulous. He would not have wanted this dragged out." "Father wanted many things," Sloane said softly. "Sometimes, what people want and what is reality are two very different things." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with unspoken accusations. I looked at Vivian again, silently willing her to intervene, to be the mother she claimed to be, but she just stared at her plate, rotating the wineglass again. Swirl, stop, swirl, stop. "Let us not talk about business tonight," Vivian whispered, her voice thin and brittle. "It is Marin's birthday." "Right," Sloane said, brightening with a terrifyingly artificial enthusiasm. "The birthday." She rang a small silver bell by her plate. The housekeeper, a new woman I did not recognize, entered with a cake. It was a small, store-bought chocolate cake, sitting awkwardly on one of my mother's antique silver platters. It looked like an afterthought, something grabbed from a bakery shelf 10 minutes before closing. There were no candles. "Happy birthday," Sloane said flatly. We ate the cake in silence. The sugar tasted like sand in my mouth. I checked my watch. I had been in the house for less than 2 hours, and my skin was crawling. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run back to the airport and fly until the fuel ran out. "I have something for you," Sloane announced suddenly, pushing her chair back. My stomach dropped. This was it, the climax of the performance. Sloane reached under the table and pulled out a rectangular box wrapped in shiny silver paper. It was about the size of a hardcover book. She placed it on the table and slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. The friction made a low, dry hissing sound. "Go on," Sloane urged, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "Open it. It is educational." I stared at the silver package. My mind flashed back to the delivery notification. "Kit?" Vivian made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a sob caught in her throat. "Sloane," Vivian said, her voice trembling. It was a warning, but it was weak, like a hand raised to stop a tidal wave. "Sloane, please." "It is just a gift, Mother," Sloane said, her eyes never leaving my face. "Marin likes data. I am just giving her some new data points to analyze." I reached out and touched the cold, metallic paper. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds before my life split into before and after. I knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever was inside this box was not a gift. It was a weapon, and Sloane had already pulled the pin. The silver paper tore with a sharp, dry sound that seemed to echo against the high ceiling of the dining room. I peeled back the metallic wrapping, my movements slow and deliberate, while Sloane watched me with the unblinking intensity of a hawk circling a field mouse. The box underneath was glossy and white, adorned with cheerful blue branding and images of smiling, diverse faces. It was a commercial DNA testing kit, the kind you buy at a pharmacy or order online when you are curious about your heritage percentages or looking for second cousins in Ireland. I stared at the plastic-wrapped collection tube visible through the clear window of the packaging. Spit in the tube, seal the cap, send it away, discover your truth. The room went absolutely silent. It was not the silence of a pause in conversation. It was a vacuum. The air seemed to be sucked out of the space, leaving a heavy, pressurized void that pressed against my eardrums. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. Sloane let the silence stretch for exactly 5 seconds. She was a master of timing. She waited until the confusion on my face had settled into recognition, and then she delivered her line with the casual cruelty of someone tossing a match into a pool of gasoline. "I thought it might be illuminating," Sloane said, her voice loud and bright, projecting as if she were addressing a boardroom rather than a family dinner. She picked up her wineglass, looking at the light catching in the red liquid. "Honestly, Marin, it might finally explain why you have always felt like another man's mistake in this house." The words hung in the air, vibrating, another man's mistake. My body reacted before my brain did. It was a survival mechanism honed over 33 years of living in the Whitaker ecosystem. When under attack, do not bleed, do not cry, do not give them the reaction they are fishing for. My lips stretched automatically into a stiff, polite smile, the kind I used when a client made a bad joke in a meeting. I prepared to deflect, to laugh it off as just another one of Sloane's drunken, venomous barbs. I opened my mouth to say something dismissive, something about how she must have had too much Pinot Noir. But then I looked at my mother, and the smile died on my face. Vivian Whitaker was a woman who cared about appearances above all else. If Sloane had made a vulgar joke, Vivian would have reprimanded her instantly. If Sloane had told a lie, Vivian would have scoffed. But Vivian was not scolding. She was not scoffing. She was terrified. My mother's face had drained of all color, leaving her skin a translucent, sickly gray. Her eyes were wide and fixed on the DNA kit, as if it were a live grenade sitting on her damask tablecloth. Her hand, the one that had been swirling the wineglass, was now gripping the stem so hard I could see the white tension in her knuckles. She looked like she was about to be sick. "Sloane," Vivian whispered. It was not a command. It was not the authoritative tone of the matriarch who ran Beacon Hill Charities. It was a plea. It was the weak, desperate sound of a woman begging for mercy. "Sloane," she said again, her voice cracking. "Please." That single word shattered my reality. If Vivian had defended me, I would have brushed Sloane's comment off as jealousy. If Vivian had gotten angry, I would have thought it was just family drama. But Vivian was begging. She was pleading with Sloane to stop. Not because the statement was false, but because it was true. The realization hit me with the physical force of a punch to the gut. The air left my lungs. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. My entire life. The feeling of being an outsider. The way my father looked at me with that sad, quiet protection. The way my mother always seemed to look through me, suddenly clicked into a horrifying focus. It wasn't just that I was the disappointment. It wasn't just that I was the quiet one. I was the evidence. Sloane was smiling. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at our mother, drinking in Vivian's fear like it was a vintage champagne. This was not about my birthday. This was a power play. Sloane was holding a knife to the throat of the family reputation, and she wanted Vivian to know she wasn't afraid to slice. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but I forced my hands to remain steady. I could not let them see me break. If I broke now, I would never put myself back together. I needed to get out of this room. I needed to get away from the smell of lilies and the sight of that cheerful blue box. I reached out and placed the lid back on the DNA kit. I moved calmly, smoothing the silver paper back over the top. "A birthday gift," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow, but it was steady, unique, truly unique. I pushed the chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh, grating sound that made Vivian flinch. I stood up. My knees felt like water, but I locked them. I picked up the box. I was not going to leave it there for them to discuss. I was taking the evidence with me. "I think I'm going to call it a night," I said. I did not look at Sloane. I did not look at Vivian. I looked at the empty space on the wall above the sideboard. "I am tired from the flight." Neither of them moved. Vivian was still staring at the table, paralyzed by the ghost Sloane had just summoned. Sloane was just watching, waiting for the tears, waiting for the scream. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Left, right, left, right. Do not run. Do not look back. I crossed the foyer, passing the portrait of the perfect family, Grant, Vivian, Sloane, and me, hanging in the golden light. It looked like a lie now. It looked like a forgery. I started up the stairs. My hand gripped the banister, the wood cool and smooth under my palm. As I reached the landing, the silence in the dining room finally broke. It was Sloane. She laughed. It was a low melodic sound, utterly devoid of warmth. It was the laugh of someone who had just won a game that no one else knew they were playing. The sound drifted up the stairs, chasing me, wrapping around my ankles like cold smoke. She wasn't laughing because it was funny. She was laughing because she had detonated the bomb, and she was the only one left standing in the wreckage. I walked into my old bedroom and closed the door. I turned the lock. The click sounded like a gunshot. I stood there in the dark, clutching the silver box to my chest, and for the first time in 33 years, I did not know who I was. The lock on my bedroom door clicked into place, but the sound brought me no comfort. In this house, locks were just suggestions, and privacy was a privilege that could be revoked at any moment. I stood with my back against the painted wood, breathing in the air of a room that was supposed to be mine, yet felt entirely like a stranger's guest suite. I had not slept in this room for 2 years, not since the last obligatory Christmas visit. Usually, when you return to a childhood bedroom, you expect to find the ghosts of your former self, a forgotten poster, a stack of paperbacks, a specific stain on the carpet, but my room was pristine. It was aggressive in its cleanliness. The bed was made with hospital corners so tight a quarter would bounce off them. The surfaces were free of dust, and the air smelled of lemon oil and vacuum exhaust. It did not look like a room that had been preserved. It looked like a room that had been staged. My risk analyst brain kicked into gear, at work. When a dataset looks too perfect, it usually means someone has manipulated the numbers. When a crime scene is too clean, it means someone has wiped it down. I set the silver box containing the DNA kit on the bedside table. I did not want to look at it yet. Instead, I turned my attention to the closet. It was a built-in unit with heavy white doors. I pulled them open. Inside, my old belongings were stored in uniform cardboard boxes, stacked 3 high on the upper shelf. At first glance, it looked orderly, but I took a step closer, tilting my head to catch the light from the desk lamp. There it was. On the highest shelf, to the far right, there was a layer of dust coating the white wood. It was a thin gray film that accumulates in old houses no matter how much you clean. But in the center of that film, there was a disruption, a rectangular shape where the dust had been scraped away, leaving the paint bright and clean. One of the boxes had been pulled out and then shoved back in, and it had happened recently, within the last week, or the dust would have settled again. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the cold, sharp focus of an investigator. Someone had been looking for something, or perhaps they had been planting something. I dragged the desk chair over to the closet. I climbed up, my heels digging into the upholstery, and pulled the disturbed box down. It was heavy. I set it on the floor and then, driven by an instinct I could not name, I pulled down the 2 boxes next to it as well. I sat cross-legged on the carpet and opened the first box. It was the standard detritus of an affluent suburban childhood. There were yearbooks, swimming trophies, and photo albums. I flipped through an album from 1998. It was supposed to be my memory box. Yet every page was a shrine to Sloane. There was Sloane holding the first-place ribbon at the science fair while I stood in the background, out of focus. There was Sloane blowing out the candles on a cake while I looked on. Even in the artifacts of my own life, I was a supporting character. I pushed that box aside and opened the one that had been moved. It was unlabeled. Inside, there were loose papers, old art projects, and a few bundles of letters. I sifted through them, my hands moving methodically. At the very bottom, beneath a stack of high school biology notes, my fingers brushed against something that felt wrong. It was a white envelope. The texture of the paper was different from the yellowing, brittle pages surrounding it. It was crisp, smooth. It was standard office supply stock, the kind you buy at a modern stationery store. It did not belong in a box of keepsakes from 20 years ago. I picked it up. It was not sealed. The flap was tucked in loosely. I pulled out the contents. It was a single photograph, printed on glossy paper. It wasn't a vintage Polaroid or a grainy film development. It looked like a reprint, a digital scan of an older image that had been reproduced recently. The image showed my mother, Vivian. She was younger, perhaps in her late 20s, her hair softer and less armored than the helmet she wore now. She was sitting on a park bench, holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. That baby was me. I recognized the embroidered bonnet from other baby pictures, but the man sitting next to her was not Grant Whitaker. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar. He was leaning in toward Vivian, his body language intimate and protective. He was smiling down at the baby, at me, with an expression of unguarded adoration that I had never seen on Grant's face. Grant had been kind. Yes, he had been steady. But this man looked at me as if I were the only thing in the world that mattered. And he looked like me. I saw it in the set of his jaw. I saw it in the shape of his eyes. I saw it in the way his eyebrows arched. It was not a vague resemblance. It was a biological mirror. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in blue ink, were 3 words written in a handwriting I knew better than my own. It was the spiky, elegant script of my mother. Forgive me. There was no date. There was no name. Just that plea for absolution, written on the back of the proof of her betrayal. I sat there for a long time, the photograph trembling slightly in my hand. The silence of the house felt heavy, pressing against the door. Forgive me. Forgive her for what? For the affair? For the lie? Or for letting me grow up in a house where I was treated like an intruder because I was a walking reminder of her sin? Then, the analyst in me took over again. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the photo. I held the glossy paper up to the light. There was a smudge on the corner of the photograph, a thumbprint. It was oily and fresh. I dropped the photo as if it had burned me. This box had been moved recently. This envelope was new. This photo had been handled. This wasn't a discovery. It was a plant. Someone wanted me to find this Sloane? Did she put it here to ensure that when I took the DNA test, I wouldn't just be confused, I would be devastated? Was this part of the setup she had bragged about on the phone? Or was it Vivian, hiding her shame in the one place she thought no one would look, only to have Sloane find it and move it to the top of the pile? No, the dust mark on the shelf said the box had been moved back. Someone had checked to make sure it was there. I stood up and went to my bag. I took out my phone. I did not cry. I did not scream. I switched to the camera mode and began to document the scene. I photographed the dust mark on the shelf, ensuring the contrast showed the disturbance. I photographed the position of the boxes on the floor. I photographed the envelope, the texture of the paper, and the location where I found it at the bottom of the box. I photographed the front and back of the picture, zooming in on the handwriting and the smudge. I was building a file. If they wanted to play a game of evidence, I would be the one with the superior documentation. I looked at the silver box on the nightstand again, the DNA kit. Sloane wanted me to take it. She expected me to use her kit, send it to her lab of choice, and let the results come back to her so she could reveal them at a time that suited her optics. She wanted to control the narrative. She wanted to own the truth of my biology just like she owned everything else in this family. I picked up the photo and tucked it into the inside pocket of my blazer, right against my ribs. I would not leave it here. I looked at the kit. I would take a test. I had to know for sure. The man in the photo was a stranger, but he was also the answer to every question I had ever asked the mirror. But I would not use the kit Sloane gave me. I would not give her the satisfaction of processing my genetic code. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up the silver box. I shoved it deep into my bag, underneath my laptop and my files. I would take it with me, not to use, but to dispose of where they couldn't find it. I was leaving this house, and I was going to find out who I was, but I would do it on my own timeline, with my own money, and under my own terms. Sloane thought she had handed me a bomb. She didn't realize she had just handed me the ammunition I needed to burn her kingdom to the ground. I did not use the kit Sloane gave me. That silver box remained at the bottom of my trash can in the airport terminal, buried under cold coffee grounds and discarded newspapers. I knew my sister. If I had used her kit, the results would have gone to an email address she controlled, or she would have had the login credentials before the sample even reached the lab. In the world of risk analysis, you never use data provided by the opposing party without independent verification. Instead, I treated my biology like a confidential audit. Back in Minneapolis, I drove to a pharmacy 3 towns over, a place where I had never filled a prescription and where no one knew my face. I paid cash for a different brand of DNA test. I did not go home immediately. I went to a generic pack-and-ship store in a strip mall and rented a private mailbox using my middle name and an old address from college. Then, I created a new email account. I did not use my name. I did not use any variation of my usual handles. I used a random string of alphanumeric characters generated by a secure password manager. I set up 2-factor authentication on a burner phone I bought at a convenience store for $40. To anyone tracking my digital footprint, Maren Whitaker was simply going to work and coming home. But in the shadows, I was building a ghost. I performed the cheek swab in my kitchen, wearing latex gloves to ensure no contamination. Though I knew that was theatrical, I just needed to feel clinical. I needed to feel like a scientist conducting an experiment on a stranger, not a woman looking for her own father. I sealed the tube, logged the kit registration code into an encrypted spreadsheet, took a photo of the return label, and dropped the package in a mailbox outside a post office 10 miles from my apartment. Then, I waited. The processing time was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks. I paid for expedited shipping and priority processing. It took exactly 12 days. When the notification hit the burner phone, I was sitting at my desk at Northbridge, analyzing a catastrophic failure model for a shipping logistics firm. The phone buzzed once in my purse. My heart stopped, then restarted with a heavy, painful thud. I finished the sentence I was typing. I saved my work. I walked calmly to the break room, poured a cup of coffee I did not want, and went out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked. I unlocked the burner phone. I opened the email. I clicked the link. The interface was bright and friendly, filled with colorful pie charts designed to make identity crises look like fun trivia. I skipped the ethnicity breakdown. I scrolled straight to the section labeled DNA matches. I expected confusion. I expected ambiguity. I did not expect the screen to be so absolute. Grant Whitaker. No genetic relationship found. I had uploaded a raw data file from a previous medical screening of my father's, something I had access to from when I helped organize his medical power of attorney years ago. Just to be certain, the system compared them. The overlap was 0. I sat there, staring at the screen. The man who had taught me to tie knots. The man who had paid for my college. The man who had held my hand at the funeral. He was a stranger, biologically, at least. But the system was not done. It had flagged a new connection. A line of text in bold font at the top of the match list, accompanied by a bright green indicator that meant high confidence. Parent-child relationship or full sibling match. The name was not Whitaker. The name was Hollis. Arthur Hollis. My hands went numb. The phone felt heavy, like a brick of lead. I did not know an Arthur Hollis. I had never heard the name Hollis spoken in our house. Yet here it was. A 99.9% probability staring back at me from a glowing screen. I did not cry. Crying is a release, and I could not afford to release anything yet. I went into work mode. Panic is a variable. Protocol is the solution. I took a screenshot of the result, then another. I downloaded the raw data file. I downloaded the match list. I exported the entire report as a PDF. I emailed the files to 3 different secure cloud storage accounts. I saved them to a physical USB drive attached to my keychain. I printed the summary page on a portable wireless printer I kept in my trunk for work emergencies. I created redundancy. If this account disappeared, if this website crashed, if someone tried to wipe the slate clean, I would still have the proof. Only when the data was secured did I allow myself to feel the anger. It started in my stomach, cold and hard, and moved up my throat. They had let me live a lie for 33 years. They had let me walk around feeling defective, feeling like I just wasn't Whitaker enough, when all along I was simply someone else. I opened the messaging app on my main phone. I navigated to the group chat titled Whitaker Family Updates. It was mostly used by my mother to send passive-aggressive reminders about holiday schedules, or by Sloan to post links to articles mentioning her success. I attached the screenshot of the DNA match. The name Arthur Hollis was circled in red. I typed a single sentence. "Can someone explain this to me?" I hit send. The response time was faster than any crisis management team I had ever worked with. My phone rang within 15 seconds. The caller ID said, "Mother." I stared at it. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. But I did not say hello. I just listened. "Delete it." Vivian's voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the polished contralto of the Beacon Hill socialite. It was a high, thin sound, stripped of all pretense. "Marin, delete that image right now. Do not save it. Do not cloud it. Delete it." "Who is Arthur Hollis?" I asked. My voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "We cannot discuss this over the phone," she hissed. "You have no idea what you are doing. If anyone sees that—" "Who sees it? Mother? The group chat is just us. Unless there is someone else monitoring our family channel." "Delete it!" she screamed. It was a raw, primal sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You are being reckless. You are going to ruin everything your father built." "My father?" I asked. "Or the man who pretended to be my father?" "He loved you," she sobbed, the anger collapsing into hysteria. "He loved you, Marin. Don't you dare dishonor him with this data." "I am not the one who dishonored him," I said. "You are—" I hung up. I blocked her number for the next hour. I needed silence. Then a text message came through. It was from Sloan. There were no hysterics, no capital letters, just a short, succinct message that landed like a judge's gavel. "Now you know." I stared at the words. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't scared. She was satisfied. She had wanted this. She had pushed me to the edge of the cliff because she knew exactly what was waiting at the bottom. She wanted me to feel illegitimate. She wanted me to feel like a fraud so that when the time came to divide the empire, I would walk away out of shame. I drove home in a daze. I sat in my apartment, the printed DNA report sitting on my coffee table like a verdict. At 11 o'clock that night, my burner phone buzzed again. It was an alert from the email provider I had created just for this test, the account with the random name, the one I had told no one about. Security alert. Multiple failed login attempts detected. Location: Boston, Massachusetts. IP address: traced to a residential proxy. I froze. I had not told them about this email. I had not told them I was taking a new test. I had only shared the result in the group chat, a screenshot that did not show the account details. How did they find the login? Unless they were not just watching the group chat, unless they had a keystroke logger on my devices, or unless they had hired someone to monitor my digital life so closely that even a burner phone and a library computer couldn't hide me. Sloan. She wasn't just gloating. She was hunting. She was trying to get into the account to delete the source data, to scrub the evidence of Arthur Hollis before I could use it. I looked at the blinking cursor on my screen. Fear washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, sharp realization. They weren't attacking me because I was a mistake. They were attacking me because I was a threat. and you only hack an account if you are terrified of what is inside it. I changed the password. I added a third layer of authentication, and then I smiled. For the first time in days. Come and get it. Sloan, I thought, I am not just holding the data anymore. I am the data. I waited until exactly 8 o'clock in the morning to make the call. I wanted to catch Sloan before her first espresso, before she had fully assembled her armor for the day. I sat at my kitchen table, a fresh notebook open in front of me, a pen in my hand, and a recording app running silently in the background on my laptop. The phone rang twice. I was wondering how long it would take you to spiral. Sloan answered. Her voice was not sleepy. It was crisp, alert, and laced with that familiar, patronizing amusement. Did you enjoy the little security alert last night? I just wanted to make sure your new account was secure. You can never be too careful with sensitive data. I am not spiraling. Sloan, I said. My voice was level, calibrated to strip away any emotion she could feed on. And I know it was you, but I am not calling to argue about IP addresses. I am calling to ask you one question, and I want a clear answer. I am listening, she said. I could hear the click of her heels against hardwood floors. She was pacing. What do you want? I asked. You gave me the kit. You pushed me to find the truth. You tried to hack the results. You clearly have the end game mapped out. So tell me, what is the price of admission? Sloan laughed, a short, sharp sound. You always think so transactionally. Marin, it is cute, but you are missing the scope. This is not about what I want from you. You are just the currency. Currency for what? For Mother, Sloan said, and her voice dropped, losing its amusement and gaining a hard, jagged edge. Do you have any idea what it is like to carry the weight of this family alone? For 30 years, I have been the perfect daughter. I have fixed the messes. I have maintained the image. I have kept her secrets while she played the grieving widow. She owes me, Marin. She owes me everything. I wrote down the words, she owes me. So you are using my illegitimacy as a bargaining chip, I said. You are blackmailing her. I prefer the term leveraging assets, Sloan corrected. Mother has been stalling on the estate transfer. She is clinging to the control of the trust. Talking about protecting Grant's legacy, it is pathetic. She needs a push to retire gracefully and hand the reins to the only person capable of running this family. That is me. And nothing motivates Vivian Whitaker quite like the threat of a public scandal. And if she doesn't hand it over, I asked, you expose me? You tell the world Grant Whitaker was a cuckold? If she doesn't sign the papers, the story comes out. Sloan said simply, and you? Well, you are the collateral damage. Speaking of which, I have been consulting with a few specialists in estate law. Did you know that most standard wills have clauses regarding issue and bloodline? If you are not Grant's biological child, Marin, your claim to the trust is tenuous, at best. She let that hang there. The threat was explicit. She wasn't just trying to take over. She was trying to erase me. You are talking about disinheriting me, I said, writing down tenuous claim and bloodline clause. I am saying that you don't belong at the table, Sloan replied coldly. You never have. You were a mistake 33 years ago, and you are an inconvenience now. I'm just correcting the ledger. If you are smart, you will walk away before the lawyers get involved. It will be cleaner, less humiliating for you. Is that a formal offer? I asked. It is a warning, Sloan said. Stay in Minneapolis. Keep your little job. Forget about Boston. If you try to fight this, I will drag you and your biological father, whoever he is, through the mud so thoroughly you will never be able to show your face in polite society again. Understood, I said. Good, Sloan said. I am glad we could have this chat. Don't call Mother. She is indisposed. The line went dead. I saved the recording. I looked at my notes. Leverage, debt, correcting the ledger. She had admitted it. She wasn't acting out of grief or moral outrage. She was acting out of greed. She believed she had earned the right to destroy me because she had spent her life polishing the cage we all lived in. I went to work, but the battlefield followed me there. At 2 in the afternoon, my desk phone rang. It was an internal extension, but the voice on the other end was the Director of Human Resources. "Marin, could you come down to my office for a moment?" she asked. Her tone was polite, but it had the specific, constrained tightness that sets off every alarm in an employee's head. I walked down the hall, my stomach churning. I sat in the gray chair opposite her desk. She looked uncomfortable, shuffling a file folder. "We received a rather strange call this morning," she began, not meeting my eyes. It was from a law firm in Boston. They were conducting a verification of character inquiry regarding a pending legal matter involving fraud. My blood ran cold. Fraud. "They asked to confirm your dates of employment and your current salary," she continued. "And then they asked if we had any records of you using aliases or falsifying personal data. Marin, they implied that there might be a criminal investigation opening up regarding identity theft." "That is absurd," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "There is no investigation. This is a family dispute. I am being harassed." "I believe you," she said, though her eyes said she wasn't sure. "But you work in risk analysis. Marin, our clients require absolute transparency. If there is a legal situation that could impact your security clearance or our reputation, we need to know. We can't have this kind of noise surrounding our analysts." "I understand," I said. "I assure you, it is baseless." "Just get it sorted out," she said, closing the folder. "We don't want to have to put you on administrative leave while an investigation clears." I walked back to my desk, feeling the walls closing in. Sloane wasn't waiting for the estate battle to start. She was salting the earth. She was attacking my credibility, my career, and my stability. She wanted me terrified. She wanted me broke. She wanted me to feel so small and powerless that I would sign whatever waiver she put in front of me just to make it stop. She thought she was breaking me. But as I sat there, staring at the black screen of my computer, the fear began to calcify into something harder, something useful. Sloane had made a critical error. She thought she was dealing with her little sister, the emotional doormat who just wanted to be loved. She forgot she was dealing with a risk analyst, and when a system is under attack, you do not engage with the attacker directly. You isolate the breach, you secure the assets, and you bring in the regulators. I picked up my personal phone. I did not call my mother. I did not call Sloane. I searched for a name I had heard mentioned in passing. A woman known in legal circles for being a shark in high-stakes inheritance disputes. I dialed the number. "My name is Marin Whitaker," I said when the receptionist answered. "I need to schedule an urgent consultation regarding a contested estate and an attempt at extortion, and I need to know if you handle cases involving DNA evidence." From this moment on, I was done being a sister. I was a plaintiff. And Sloane was about to learn that while she might control the narrative in the dining room, she did not control the law. I hired Lena Rourke because she did not have a website with a smiling headshot. I hired her because when I called her firm, the receptionist did not ask how I was feeling. She asked for the case number and the opposing counsel. Lena was a specialist in contested inheritance and high-conflict probate. Her office in downtown Minneapolis was devoid of mahogany or leather. It was glass and steel, sharp edges and transparent surfaces, much like the woman herself. I sat across from her and laid out the timeline. I did not tell it as a sob story. I presented it as a sequence of data points. I started with the funeral and Sloane's phone calls about the file and the timeline. I detailed the ambush at the birthday dinner, the delivery of the DNA kit, and the specific wording of Sloane's mockery regarding another man's mistake. I presented the photograph I had found in the closet, the one with my mother's handwriting asking for forgiveness. I showed her the results of my independent DNA test, the match to Arthur Hollis, and the subsequent security logs showing the attempted unauthorized access to my account. Finally, I played the recording of Sloane admitting she was using my parentage as leverage to force our mother to hand over control of the trust. Lena listened without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen moving in sharp, precise strokes. When I finished, she capped the pen and looked at me. "This is not a family spat," Lena said. Her voice was dry and devoid of sympathy, which was exactly what I needed. This is a constructive disinheritance strategy. Your sister is trying to bypass the standard probate process by forcing a settlement before the will is even read. She is banking on the bloodline clause. The what? I asked. Many old trusts, especially those drafted more than 20 years ago, contain language that restricts beneficiaries to the issue of the grantor. Lina explained. Depending on how the term issue is defined in your father's documents, it could strictly mean biological descendants. Sloan is betting that if she proves you are not Grant Whitaker's biological child, you automatically default out of the trust. She wants you to panic and sign a waiver in exchange for a fraction of what you might be entitled to, just to keep the secret and save your reputation. She is attacking my job, too, I added. She called my HR department. Standard scorch-the-earth tactic, Lina said, dismissing it with a wave of her hand. She is trying to cut off your resources. She wants you broke, scared, and unemployable, so you cannot afford to fight her. It is ugly, but it is predictable. Lina leaned forward. We need to know the landscape before we engage. I want you to dig into the months leading up to your father's death. Who was in the room? Who controlled the paper flow? I spent the next 48 hours on the phone. I did not call family. I called the invisible people. I called Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper who had been let go 2 weeks after the funeral. I called the neighbors who spent their days watching the street from their bay windows. I called my father's old business partner who had been slowly pushed out of the loop. The picture that emerged was chilling. Mrs. Higgins told me that for the last 6 months of his life, Grant had been isolated. Miss Sloan was always there, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She fired the day nurse because she said she wanted to care for him herself, but mostly, she was in the study with him, lots of papers, lots of signing. Mr. Grant seemed tired. He just wanted to rest, but she kept bringing him documents. The neighbor, Mr. Henderson, confirmed it. Saw her car there every day, sometimes late at night. Your mother never came out. It was like Sloan was running the show. It was a pattern of undue influence. Sloan hadn't just discovered a secret. She had been curating the environment to exploit it. She had isolated a dying man to perhaps alter the very documents she was now using to threaten me. I brought this information back to Lina. She nodded, adding it to the file. But before we could strategize our next move, her assistant knocked on the door and handed her a thick envelope. It just arrived via courier, the assistant said, from New York. Lina opened it. It was from a law firm I did not recognize. Pearson Associates. Is this the family firm? Lina asked. No, I said. The family firm is in Boston, Holloway and Finch. Lina scanned the letter. Her eyebrows shot up. This is interesting. Pearson Associates represents the estate of Grant Whitaker, not the family trust, the estate itself. What does it say? It is a request for your current address and contact information to be verified for the purpose of a mandatory beneficiary meeting, Lina read. But look at the date. This was drafted 3 days ago, before you even took the DNA test. Why would they need to verify me if they are the estate lawyers? They wouldn't, Lina said, unless there is a specific instruction to find you directly, bypassing the family. But before we could process that, the fax machine in the corner beeped. A second document began to churn out. This one was not from New York. It was from Boston. It was from the firm Sloan had bragged about dining with. Lina picked it up while the paper was still warm. Cease and desist, she read flatly. You are hereby ordered to cease the dissemination of false and defamatory statements regarding the Whitaker family, specifically regarding the paternity of Marin Whitaker and the mental state of Grant Whitaker. Any further communication with third parties regarding these private matters will result in immediate litigation for damages. I felt a surge of panic. I haven't disseminated anything. I only posted that one picture in the private group chat. Lina smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. Exactly. They are accusing you of defamation for a crime you haven't committed yet. They sent this because they know you are asking questions. They know you are talking to the housekeeper. They are trying to gag you. She tossed the paper onto the desk. When an opponent uses fear instead of facts, it means they are missing something important. They are missing control. Sloane is terrified of what you might find if you keep digging. The phone on Lena's desk rang. It was a direct line, one she rarely answered herself. She frowned and picked it up. "Lina Rourke," she said. She listened for a long time. Her expression shifted from professional detachment to intense curiosity. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "He is here with me now," Lina said into the receiver. "Yes, we have the cease and desist. No, we have not responded yet." She paused. "I understand. And you are sure the condition has been met?" She listened again, then wrote a name on her pad. Miles Kersey. "We will be there," Lina said, and hung up. "Who was that?" I asked. "That was a private investigator named Miles Kersey," Lina said. "He says he was hired by your father 2 years ago." "My father hired a PI?" "Yes," Lina said. "And Mr. Kersey says he has been holding a specific package of information, waiting for a trigger event. He told me that the issuance of a cease and desist letter against you by a family member was one of the conditions your father set for its release." I stared at her. My father expected Sloane to sue me? "It appears your father expected a lot of things," Lina said, standing up and grabbing her coat. "Mr. Kersey is in the lobby. He says he needs to speak with us immediately, and then we are all going to New York. The meeting with the estate lawyer isn't a request. Marin, it is the main event, and whatever Sloane thinks she is starting, your father finished it a long time ago." The flight to New York was a blur of gray clouds and unspoken tension. I sat next to Lina Rourke in row 4, staring at the back of the seat in front of me, trying to regulate my breathing. My phone vibrated in my pocket, just as the wheels touched the tarmac at LaGuardia. It was a text message from a blocked number. "Don't come. Don't shame the family. Go back to Minneapolis and this goes away." I showed the screen to Lina. She adjusted her glasses, read it, and gave a small, humorless smile. "They are scared," she said, her voice cutting through the cabin noise. "People who hold all the cards do not send anonymous threats from burner phones. They are bluffing, Marin, and they know their hand is weak." We took a town car into the city. The office of Pierce & Associates was located in a monolith of glass and steel in Midtown, the kind of building that scrapes the sky and looks down on the rest of the world with indifference. We took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The doors slid open to reveal a reception area that felt more like a mausoleum than a place of business. The floors were marble, the walls were paneled in dark wood, and the silence was absolute. A receptionist led us to the main conference room. It was a cavernous space dominated by a table long enough to land a small plane on. At the far end, windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but the blinds were drawn halfway, casting the room in a cool, severe twilight. My mother was already there. Vivian sat on the left side of the table, flanked by an empty chair. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The imposing matriarch of Beacon Hill had shrunk into her Chanel suit. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and her eyes were darting around the room, fixing on the door, the window, the artwork, everywhere except at me. When I walked in, she flinched, but she did not speak. She checked her watch. Then she checked it again 10 seconds later. She was a woman waiting for a guillotine blade to drop. I sat on the opposite side, with Lina next to me. We waited. 5 minutes later, the double doors swung open with aggressive force. Sloane walked in. She was wearing a crimson dress that stood out violently against the muted tones of the room. She walked with her chin high, projecting the supreme confidence of someone who believes they have already won the war. Beside her was Caleb Voss, her personal attorney. I knew of him by reputation. He was a fixer for the Boston elite, a man who specialized in making problems disappear for a high hourly rate. Sloane's eyes swept the room. She sneered at me, a quick, dismissive curl of her lip, before her gaze landed on the stack of files sitting at the head of the table. For a fraction of a second, her stride faltered. There were too many files. If this was a simple disinheritance meeting, There should have been a single sheet of paper. "Let us get this over with," Sloane said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "I have a flight back to Boston at 6. "You might want to reschedule that," a deep voice said. Ronan Pierce entered from a side door. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of gravitas that makes the air pressure in the room drop. He did not look like a lawyer who billed by the hour. He looked like a judge who sentenced by the decade. He walked to the head of the table, placed a single hand on the stack of files, and remained standing. "Good afternoon," Ronan said. He did not smile. "We are here today to execute a specific protocol within the estate plan of the late Grant Whitaker." "Protocol?" Caleb Voss interjected, leaning forward. "We are here for the reading of the will. My client, Ms. Whitaker, is the primary executor. We expect this to be a formality regarding the transfer of the trust management." "This is not the reading of the will," Ronan corrected him, his voice level. "This is a conditional meeting. It was triggered 72 hours ago." "Triggered by what?" Sloane demanded. Ronan looked at her. His eyes were cold. "By the activation of Clause 19, subsection B, of Mr. Whitaker's private instructions. This clause is explicitly labeled, in the event of a challenge to legitimacy." The room went dead silent. Vivian let out a small, strangled sound. Sloane froze, her hand halfway to her water glass. "I don't know what you are talking about," Sloane said, though her voice had lost its sharp edge. "Mr. Whitaker was a man of foresight," Ronan continued, ignoring her denial. "He anticipated that after his death, there might be an attempt to use biological parentage as a weapon to alter the distribution of his estate. He left specific instructions that if any beneficiary were to use DNA evidence, public rumor, or private blackmail to shame, marginalize, or attempt to disinherit another beneficiary based on bloodline, this meeting was to be convened immediately." He opened the first file. "We have received evidence," Ronan said, lifting a document, "that Maren Whitaker was presented with a DNA test in a hostile manner. We have logs of a cease and desist letter sent to her aimed at silencing her inquiries. We have recorded threats regarding her employment. The condition has been met. The trap has been sprung." Sloane stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, her face flushing a blotchy red. "She is not his daughter. That is a fact. I have the kit. I have the proof. She is a fraud, and she has no right to sit at this table and take money that belongs to the Whitaker bloodline. Father would never—" "Sit down," Ronan said. He did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He simply delivered the command with such absolute authority that Sloane's mouth snapped shut. "I said, sit down. Ms. Whitaker," Ronan repeated. "You are laboring under the delusion that you are the one driving this car. You are not. You are merely the passenger who just drove it off a cliff." Sloane slowly sank back into her chair. Caleb Voss looked pale. He was realizing he had walked into an ambush without a map. "The issue of Maren's paternity," Ronan said, looking directly at me for the first time with a gaze that was surprisingly gentle, "was not a secret to Grant Whitaker. He knew. He knew from the day she was born." Vivian covered her face with her hands. "And knowing that," Ronan said, turning back to Sloane, "he prepared for the possibility that someone, specifically you, Sloane, would one day try to use it against her. You thought the DNA test was your ace in the hole. It wasn't. It was the key that unlocked the rest of the file." Ronan pushed the stack of documents toward the center of the table. "This meeting is not about Maren's legitimacy," Ronan declared. "This meeting is about yours." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the files. I looked at Sloane's terrified face. And suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The birthday dinner, the cruelty, the gift. It wasn't just bullying. It was a test. My father had set a test from beyond the grave. Not for me, but for her. He had given her a choice. Be a sister or be a predator. She had chosen to be a predator, and she had just walked right into the cage he built for her. Ronan Pierce did not give Sloane time to recover. He treated the conference room like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided, and he was simply reading the sentence. He flipped open the leather-bound binder in front of him, the sound of the heavy pages turning echoing in the silent room. "You built your entire strategy on the assumption that Grant Whitaker was a victim of deception," Ronan stated, his voice filling the space without effort. "You believed that if you revealed the truth of Marin's parentage, the shock would invalidate her status as a beneficiary. You were wrong." He slid a document across the polished mahogany toward Sloane. It was a sworn affidavit, signed and notarized, dated 33 years ago. "Grant knew," Ronan said. "He knew before Marin was born. He knew the identity of the biological father, and he made a conscious, documented choice to put his name on the birth certificate. He did not do it out of ignorance. He did it out of love." I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at the document. It was my father's signature, strong and loop-heavy, the way he wrote before the tremors set in. He had known, all those years, when I felt like an imposter. He had known exactly who I was, and he had never once treated me like anything less than his daughter. "Furthermore," Ronan continued, pointing to a highlighted paragraph in the trust document, "Grant amended the definition of issue in his estate planning 5 years ago. He specifically defined his children not by biological markers, but by acknowledgement, nurturing, and legal recognition. He included a handwritten addendum stating that Marin Whitaker is to be regarded as his child in all matters, specifically blocking any challenge based on genetic testing. He built a firewall around you, Marin, because he knew one day someone inside this house would try to burn you down." Sloane was shaking her head, her face pale. That is coercion," she stammered, grasping at straws. "He was sick. He was not in his right mind. Mother must have forced him." "Incorrect," Ronan cut her off. He reached for a second file. This one was black. "We have the logs from Miles Kersey." The mention of the private investigator made Caleb Voss stiffen. He leaned over and whispered something urgent into Sloane's ear, but she shook him off. "Mr. Kersey documented everything," Ronan said, his tempo increasing, hitting us with facts like physical blows. "He tracked the timeline of your care for your father. Sloane, he has records of you meeting with 3 different estate litigators while Grant was undergoing chemotherapy. He has audio recordings from the home security system, which you thought was disabled, where you are heard pressuring a medicated, confused man to sign addendums regarding the property titles." Ronan tossed a stack of photos onto the table. They fanned out, showing Sloane entering and leaving law offices, looking over her shoulder. "But Grant was lucid enough to call me," Ronan said grimly. "He told me you were trying to rewrite the will. He let you believe you had succeeded. But every document you had him sign during those last 6 months, he signed them under documented duress. We have the doctor's notes proving his mental state on those specific dates. Those papers are worthless." Sloane looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And then there is the malice," Ronan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was an invoice. "You claimed the DNA kit was a spontaneous joke, a last-minute gag gift. But this is the order confirmation. You bought that kit 4 months ago. You held on to it. You waited until the first birthday after the funeral to deploy it. You orchestrated a public humiliation of your sister to destabilize her emotional state before the probate hearings." "That is not illegal," Sloane hissed, her eyes narrowing. "Being mean is not a crime." "No," Ronan agreed. "But hacking is—" He slammed the final document onto the table. It was the cybersecurity report from my independent DNA test. "We traced the unauthorized login attempts to your personal laptop. Sloane, the IP address matches the Wi-Fi at your condo in the seaport. You tried to access Marin's medical data illegally. That is a federal offense, and it proves intent to defraud the estate by manufacturing or suppressing evidence." The room was spinning. I looked at Sloane. She wasn't the terrifying, powerful sister anymore. She looked small. She looked caught. Ronan stood up straight, buttoning his jacket. Which brings us to the no contest clause. Caleb Voss went white. He reached out and clamped his hand over Sloane's forearm, digging his fingers in hard. Grant included a specific provision, Ronan said, looking directly at Sloane. It states that any beneficiary who challenges the validity of the trust, or who attempts to disqualify another beneficiary through extra-legal means, including blackmail, harassment, or character assassination, shall immediately forfeit their entire share of the estate. Sloane gasped. He wouldn't. That is millions. He did, Ronan said. And it gets worse. The clause includes a clawback provision. If you trigger this penalty, the estate has the right to recover all gifts, allowances, and loans issued to you over the last 10 years. The apartment, the car, the startup capital for your failed business. It all comes back to the pot. Shut up, Sloane, Caleb Voss said. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a command. Do not say another word. But, Sloane started. You are done, Voss said, his voice trembling with professional terror. They have you on fraud, computer crimes, and elder abuse. If you speak, you are not just losing the money. You are going to prison. We are walking away, now. Sloane looked at him, then at Ronan, and finally at me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. She slumped back in her chair, defeated. Ronan turned his gaze to my mother. Vivian had not moved. She had not looked up. She was staring at her hands, which were twisted together in her lap. Mrs. Whitaker, Ronan said softly, is there anything you wish to add? Do you dispute Grant's knowledge of Marin's parentage? Vivian closed her eyes. A single tear tracked through her perfect foundation. She shook her head slowly. He knew, she whispered. Her voice was a ghost of a sound. He always knew. He was a better man than I deserved. The admission hung in the air, heavy and final. Sloane let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. The alliance was broken. The leverage was gone. Ronan reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. It bore only one word on the front, written in the shaky, beloved handwriting of my father. Marin. Grant gave me this the week before he died, Ronan said, placing it gently on the table in front of me. He said to give it to you only if we ended up in this room, under these circumstances. He hoped you would never have to read it, but he wanted to be here for you if you did. I reached out and touched the envelope. My hand was trembling. The paper felt warm, as if it still held the heat of his hand. I wasn't just holding a letter. I was holding the final piece of the shield he had spent his dying days constructing for me. He hadn't just left me money. He had left me the truth. My hands trembled as I broke the red wax seal. The sound of the paper tearing was the only noise in the room, sharp and decisive, like a gavel striking a block. Inside, there were 2 documents. The first was a formal legal instrument, a durable power of attorney and a directive regarding harassment that gave me the unilateral authority to file restraining orders on behalf of the estate against any family member obstructing my peace. The second was a sheet of personal stationery, the cream-colored kind my father kept in his desk drawer, smelling faintly of tobacco and cedar. I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky, written in the final weeks when his strength was failing, but the words were clear. My dearest Marin, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means I failed to protect you in life, so I must protect you in death. I have known about your sister's ambition and your mother's silence for a long time. I saw how they looked at you. I saw how they made you feel small. I am sorry I was not strong enough to stop it sooner. You are going to hear things about blood and biology. They will try to use science to tell you who you are. Do not listen. Biology is an accident. Family is a choice. You were never a mistake. Marin, you were the only choice I ever made that I never regretted. You are my daughter in every way that matters. I have left you the power to end this war. Use it. Love, Dad. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The cold knot of anxiety that had been sitting in my chest for weeks finally dissolved. I looked up. The room was waiting for my reaction. They expected tears. They expected a scream, but I was an analyst, and I had just been given the final data point I needed to close the case. I turned to Sloane. She was slumped in her chair, looking at the table as if she could burn a hole through the wood with her eyes. She looked diminished, stripped of the glamour and the arrogance that had been her armor for 3 decades. "You wanted a reaction," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and filled the room. "You gave me that test because you wanted to break me. You thought if you took away my name, I would crumble." Sloane looked up, her eyes wet and angry. "I just wanted what was mine," she whispered. "No," I corrected her. "You wanted what was Dad's, and you thought you could sell my humiliation to buy his approval, but you miscalculated the valuation. You tried to sell a story that he had already bought and paid for 33 years ago." I placed my hand on the legal document Ronan had given me. "This ends today," I said. Lena Rourke leaned forward, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "From this moment forward, all communication between Maren Whitaker and the rest of this family will go through my office. If you text her, we will file a motion. If you call her workplace again, we will sue for tortious interference. If you show up at her apartment, we will have you arrested for trespassing. Do I make myself clear?" Sloane opened her mouth to argue, to find some last scrap of leverage, but Caleb Voss, her lawyer, placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "It is over, Sloane," he said quietly. "Do not say another word. We are accepting the terms." Sloane tried to smile. It was a grotesque effort. She tried to summon that old, condescending smirk, the one she used to dismiss me at dinner parties. But her face wouldn't cooperate. The smile fractured, revealing the terrified, greedy child underneath. She looked like a painting left out in the rain, the colors running and fading until there was nothing left but a stained canvas. Ronan Pierce cleared his throat. "I will proceed with the execution of the estate as outlined. Maren, your share is secured in a separate trust, untouchable by any contest from this table. Sloane, your share is conditional. We will be monitoring your compliance with the no contest clause. One step out of line, one disparaging remark, and you will be removed from the ledger entirely. And yes, that includes the clawback of the down payment on your condo." The meeting was adjourned. I stood up. I did not say goodbye. There was no need. As we walked toward the heavy double doors, I heard a movement behind me. "Maren." It was Vivian. My mother. She had stood up, her hands clutching her purse, her eyes wide and pleading. She looked old, for the first time. I saw the lines around her mouth and the fear in her eyes. She took a step toward me. "Maren, please," she said, her voice shaking. "I want to explain. There is so much you don't know about that time, about why I did what I did. I want to talk to you." I stopped. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like a stain on her reputation. I thought about the photo in the closet. I thought about the silence at the dinner table. "You had 33 years to explain," I said. "You had 1,000 dinners to tell the truth. You chose silence every single time. You can tell your story. Mother, you can write it down. You can tell it to Sloane, but I am not going to carry it for you anymore." I turned my back on her. I walked out of the office, past the marble reception desk, and into the elevator. When the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the Whitaker family, I finally let out a long, slow breath. I flew back to Minneapolis that night. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the white walls didn't look sterile anymore. They looked clean. They looked like a fresh start. I kept my job at Northbridge. I kept my small life. But things were different. I had the letter from my father framed and hung it in my hallway, the only decoration I needed. I eventually reached out to Arthur Hollis, the man from the DNA match. We met for coffee. He was kind, quiet, and had eyes that looked like mine. We are taking it slow, building a friendship based on choice, not obligation. As for the house in Boston, the grand estate on Beacon Hill, it is just a line item on a spreadsheet now. It is an asset to be managed, a portfolio to be diversified. I don't visit. I don't call. Every month, I receive a report from Ronan Pierce detailing the fund performance and confirming that Sloane has remained silent. She has to be silent. Her lifestyle depends on it. I won. I didn't win by screaming. I didn't win by throwing wine in someone's face or causing a scene at a gala. I won by using the very things they worshipped against them: the law, the money, and the reputation. Sloane thought I was the mistake that would ruin the family. Instead, I became the auditor who closed their account. And in the end, the person they tried to erase is the only one holding the keys to the cage. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how I handled my family. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.